The morning dawned quietly on the riverside town, its people awakening to familiar sights and sounds. Children's laughter echoed down narrow streets, vendors arranged their colourful goods, and fishermen prepared their boats, casting nets in hope of a good catch. Life moved in rhythmic harmony here, untouched by the chaos that churned just beyond the horizon. For days, the ominous shadow of Typhoon Wipfer had loomed over the region. Meteorologists warned of its growing power, predicting heavy rains and fierce winds that would test the resilience of the land and its people. Yet, for many in this town, such storms were seasonal events, daunting perhaps, but manageable. Preparations were made, prayers said, and daily routines continued. At the heart of this town stood the old bridge, a structure that had withstood decades of floods, storms, and the passage of time. This bridge was more than concrete and steel. It was a lifeline. Traders crossed it with goods, children travelled over it to school, and families used it to reach markets, clinics, and neighbours. It connected not just places but lives. As morning deepened, the skies darkened. The first drops of rain fell, gentle at first, then growing into a steady pounding cascade. Streets began to glisten under the wet assault, rivers started to swell, and the familiar hum of daily life gave way to uneasy murmurs. Locals glanced upwards, noting the shifting clouds, feeling a primal sense of foreboding. Beneath the bridge, the river's flow quickened. Water levels rose, creeping closer to the underside of the structure, carrying with it branches, debris, and an unseen menace. The bridge's ancient foundations, long battered by nature's whims, silently bore the mounting pressure. Throughout the town, small alarms rang out. Emergency broadcasts urged caution. Social media lit up with warnings and images of flooding in neighbouring regions. But many dismissed these alerts, confident in the bridge's enduring strength and their town's history of weathering storms. By midday, the rain was relentless, drumming on rooftops and turning roads into rivers. The river beneath the bridge had transformed from a gentle current into a roaring force. The water clawed at the banks, swelling with alarming speed. Cracks, invisible to the untrained eye, began to appear in the bridge's supports, weakening the very path thousands depended on. Then, just as the afternoon sun fought to break through the clouds, catastrophe struck. A sharp, thunderous crack echoed across the valley, the sound of concrete surrendering to nature's fury. The bridge trembled violently before a section collapsed abruptly into the raging river below. Panic exploded on the far side, screams and shouts filling the air as dozens caught mid-crossing were swept off their feet. Those who had trusted the bridge's strength now faced the terrifying reality of the flood's raw power. Men, women, and children were plunged into icy, swirling water, struggling desperately against the current that seemed intent on dragging them into oblivion. On the riverbanks, stunned witnesses could do nothing but watch as the disaster unfolded. Rescue teams scrambled into action, but even their courage was tested by the merciless waters. This was no ordinary flood. It was a violent reminder of nature's unpredictability and the fragility of human constructs. The bridge collapse was a turning point, the moment when calm gave way to chaos, and a community's fate hung precariously in the balance. As emergency sirens wailed and the storm raged on, the question on everyone's mind was simple yet profound. How many lives could be saved before the flood claimed more victims? The moment the bridge crumbled, a shockwave rippled through the town, shaking hearts and souls. Dozens of people found themselves caught in a nightmare they had never imagined, swept away by icy, merciless waters that showed no mercy. Panic surged as survivors fought against the roaring currents, clawing desperately for anything to hold on to, broken planks, uprooted branches, even each other. The river, swollen beyond reason, had transformed into a deadly trap, pulling victims into its dark, swirling depths. From the banks, terrified cries echoed, mingling with the relentless thunder of rain and the chaotic splash of rushing water. Families were torn apart in seconds, their screams lost in the storm's howl. Amid the chaos, local rescue teams sprang into action with fierce determination. Trained divers plunged into the churning waters, risking their lives to reach those stranded. Boats, often barely holding against the torrents, weaved through the flooded streets and river bends, searching for any sign of life. Helicopters cut through the grey skies, shining powerful spotlights down on rooftops and treetops where survivors had taken refuge. The air was thick with tension. Every second counted, every life precious. Yet the flood's wrath made every rescue perilous. Swift currents overturned boats. Rescuers had to battle exhaustion and hypothermia alongside the victims. Communication lines faltered as storms disrupted power and signal towers, isolating parts of the town and complicating coordination. Amid the terror, stories of human courage began to surface. A schoolteacher, refusing to abandon her students, led a group to higher ground through waist-deep water, shielding them from the cold and fear. A young fisherman whose boat had been destroyed helped pull survivors to safety with a makeshift raft. Volunteers from neighbouring towns joined in, their own homes threatened, but their spirits unbroken. Hospitals braced for the influx of the injured. Hypothermia, broken bones and drowning victims filled emergency rooms. Doctors and nurses worked round the clock, their faces etched with fatigue but fueled by determination. Meanwhile, the floodwaters continued to rise, swallowing more roads and neighbourhoods. Emergency shelters overflowed, forcing the weary and displaced to huddle together in cramped, damp conditions. The government dispatched additional aid, but the scale of the disaster was overwhelming. In the midst of devastation, grief hung heavy. Families searched desperately for missing loved ones. Children cried for parents who had vanished beneath the waters. Communities mourned their losses, even as they struggled to survive. Experts warned that this disaster was not a freak accident, but a symptom of a larger crisis. Climate change, decades of rapid urban expansion, and inadequate infrastructure had combined to amplify nature's fury. The bridge collapse was a tragic symbol of vulnerabilities long ignored. As darkness fell over the flooded town, rescue efforts pressed on, a race against time and the elements. The question remained, how many would survive the night? How many stories would end beneath the merciless flood?